Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McMillan.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stuart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. The first item of business is general questions, and at question number 1 I call Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its plans to introduce regulation for pet groomers, animal boarders and dog walkers in light of the results of the public consultation from earlier this year that showed a high level of support for such measures.
Mr Jim Fairley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. While the consultation undertaken last year demonstrated support for licensing, concerns were also expressed about the proportionality and cost of statutory licensing and about the capacity of local authorities to absorb and meaningfully enforce additional licensing requirements when budgets are already stretched. We are therefore assessing whether less onerous and more proportionate approaches, such as registration schemes linked to codes of conduct, could deliver similar outcomes to licensing. Meantime, our immediate focus is to deliver on the proposal to regulate canine fertility businesses due to the significant animal welfare concerns associated with this sector.
Stuart McMillan.
Thank the Minister for that reply. And those of us who have pets recognise that they are treated like one of the family, and it's reasonable then that pet owners want reassurances that any services that they access are insured and staff appropriately qualified, which hasn't always been the case, as the Minister will know. Now, will the Minister commit to consulting the sector more widely to understand the scale of growth in pet services in Scotland, with the intention of developing a proportionate yet robust regulatory framework covering the sector to protect pets from harm?
Minister.
I wholeheartedly agree with the point that the member makes, that pet owners need to be reassured that persons providing pet services are suitably insured and qualified. And so I therefore encourage any pet owner accessing such services to undertake due diligence and to confirm with the service provider that they are indeed insured and qualified. On the point about further consultation, it's not something that we propose to take forward at this time, but the Government will, of course, continue to engage with stakeholders in order to develop proportionate controls for pet service providers in Scotland.
Question number 2, Mark Ruskell.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on how it will ensure that all appropriate roads have a safer speed limit of 20 mph by 2025.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
The Scottish Government is firmly committed to reducing road casualties and creating safer streets for everyone. Evidence shows that a person is 7 times more likely to survive if hit at 20 mph than 30 mph. All local authorities are committed to meeting the 2025 deadline and have developed their own plans designating their own streets, and £4 million has been provided to 21 local authorities this financial year to aid implementation. Transport Scotland has has issued national guidance to support local authorities with the rollout of the 20 mph speed limits on appropriate roads, and early feedback from Borders and Highland councils as early adopters has been positive, with a recognition by local communities that this initiative can significantly reduce road casualties, encourage sustainable travel and foster safer, more vibrant communities.
Mark Ruskell.
Well, can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? It is clear now that every single council in Scotland is ready to roll out 20 mile an hour, and that is remarkable. It means that by the end of next year, potentially every child in every community could be living on a safer street in Scotland, and that local level implementation alongside a national programme is really going to help to drive forward national road safety messages that have been so successful in Wales in driving down casualty rates. But, Cabinet Secretary, when I speak to councils and COSLA, there is uncertainty as to what funds will be available to get the job done in the next 12 months, particularly staff resources within councils. So can the Cabinet Secretary provide clarity as to how the budget announced yesterday will enable each and every one of those 32 councils to deliver that implementation plans in the next year? Because it's clear it's going to cost more than £4 million.
Cabinet Secretary.
So road authorities had submitted expected expenditure to deliver their own plans to achieve the 20 mph limits on the roads they have chosen in their own council areas. However, we know that early adopters have spent significantly under these estimates, in one case by 62%. So therefore, we're confident there are sufficient funds to meet the needs in the 2025-26 budget, and that can be found in the road safety line in the roads budget that was published yesterday.
Brief supplementary, Sue Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Bus passengers in Edinburgh face longer journeys under Council's plans to cut speeds from 60 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour. The proposed changes are expected to cost £850,000 and would affect 66 roads in Edinburgh. Lothian buses have raised concerns that the slower traffic will affect journey times for passengers, adding to the misery commuters face across our capital. Yet only 18 fines for breaching the 20 mile an hour speed limit in Edinburgh have been issued since 2021. Without enforcement, this is nothing more than an expensive box-ticking exercise. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that introducing more 20 mile an hour limits will increase congestion and journey times and do nothing to encourage people to use public transport?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm not sure if the Conservative Party are aware of the data and the information that shows there are significant reductions in the number of casualties on affected roads, and that is the driver for this change and improvement. In terms of enforcement, she'll be aware, because I know that she's a former Edinburgh councillor, that she will know about the powers that local authorities have themselves in this point. She does make a point in terms of the issue around whether 20 miles per hour actually slows the traffic, and there's an issue around congestion and whether in terms of that congestion affecting bus travel times. But of course, again, that's an issue that the Edinburgh City Council, who of course own the buses in Edinburgh, can in terms, well, they run a publicly.
Ms Webber, if you would allow the Cabinet Secretary to respond. Cabinet Secretary.
So Lothian buses have shareholders. Some of them, a very small amount is West Lothian. They have shareholders, which are also Edinburgh City Council. And I would have thought the transport spokesperson for the Conservatives might have known that. Yeah. So in terms of putting forward a reasonable case for how do we make sure that we get the benefits of increased bus use, but also safer streets, I would refer to her to speak to her former colleagues in Edinburgh City Council in the Edinburgh-specific issue.
Question number 3, Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to maintain and grow supported businesses.
Mr Ivan McKee.
The Scottish Government values the role of supported businesses and is committing to helping them achieve commercial sustainability. In Scotland, we pride ourselves in leading in this area with both legislation and systems that support that. Legislation such as the Procurement Reform Scotland Act 2014 contains a number of provisions to support supported businesses, and the multi-supplier dynamic purchasing system for requirements reserved for supported businesses describes a range of products and services that supported businesses can provide to the public sector. And recent data shows that almost £28 million of public sector spend was spent by public bodies with supported businesses in in the previous year. Supported businesses are also included in the recently published Social Enterprise Action Plan. And I'm working with officials to provide further guidance to public bodies to set guidelines on how much they should seek to spend with supported businesses across the country.
Richard Leonard.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? Haven Products in Larbert, with 9 out of 10 of its workforce disabled, is facing closure. I've been pressing the government to act to save these jobs for over 6 months. As of today, neither the government nor its short life working group has come up with a plan to save the factory. And this week, the board of Haven confirmed that unless this situation is resolved, redundancy consultations will begin in early January. Will the Minister agree with me that the time for words has long passed? These workers need action. Will he give an undertaking today that a rescue plan will be put in place before Christmas to save these vital jobs?
Minister.
I absolutely agree with the member, and I genuinely thank him for bringing this issue to the Chamber. I have met with the Chief Executive of Haven Products, and I believe that the Chief Executive will be visiting the Parliament in the next few days at the request of Mr Leonard. I have been working tirelessly on this matter to support Haven and indeed other supported businesses, because we absolutely recognise, not just because it's the right thing to do, but also, frankly, because it's more cost effective to support these businesses than it is for them to close, and for the individuals concerned to have to be supported through cost to the wider public services. So I'm absolutely committed to doing that. The member will be aware that we work within regime round about what we can and can't do with specific procurement requirements, but I have asked officials that we need to deliver on this. We need to make sure that Haven and other supported businesses are supported. They have identified opportunities in the medium term, which is very welcome, but as the member rightly identifies, what needs to happen is delivery of orders and financial support in the immediate term, and they can rest assured that we are working to make sure that that indeed will happen.
Briefest of supplementaries, Colin Beattie.
The Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations has estimated that Labour's national insurance hike will cost the sector £75 million, with Edinburgh Social Enterprise Foursquare warning that after Labour's tax hike they have nowhere left to cut. Can the Minister advise what assessment has the Scottish Government made of the impact of these changes in the third sector, and can he outline how the Scottish budget announced yesterday is supporting third sector organisations, including social enterprises?
Briefly, Minister.
The member raised a very important point. Those measures that have been taken in the UK budget have a significant impact on the sector. We are working with the sector, indeed others, to understand the full impact of that, and are having negotiations with UK Government to secure funding for all of those organisations impacted in Scotland as a consequence of those actions. And you will know that the Scottish budget published yesterday has a range of measures to support those enterprises.
Thank you. Be grateful for concise questions and responses. I call Colin Smyth at question number 4.
Thank you, President Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to Public Health Scotland's recent NHS dental monitoring report, which indicates that almost 40% of adults in Dumfries and Galloway are not registered with an NHS dentist.
Minister Jenny Minto.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government has made available tailored grant funding, and the Board recently had a successful Scottish Dental Access Initiative application, which will result in 2,000 new NHS registrations in Muffet. We're also funding dental emergency evening clinics for unregistered patients, which have been in operation for almost 18 months. Officials are working closely with the Board to ensure that measures are in place for appropriate staffing of the Garden Hill and Castle Douglas practice to support the provision of emergency and urgent care to unregistered patients and provide routine dental care for a number of registered patients within priority groups.
Colin Smyth.
Minister, it's not just adults. Over 20% of children in Dumfries and Galloway are not registered with an NHS dentist, the worst figures in Scotland. And the actions that she outlines there are clearly not working. The problem has been getting worse. So why is the crisis, Minister, so bad in Dumfries and Galloway? Why is the action not making a difference? And more specifically, more importantly, what more will the government do to tackle the crisis before NHS dentistry frankly becomes a thing of the past for far too many of my constituents?
Minister.
I thank Colin Smyth for his question, and he will recognise that prior to Brexit, a large proportion of the dentists within Dumfries and Galloway and in other rural areas of Scotland came from European countries. I recently met with Secretary of State for Care, Stephen Kinnock, MP, as well as my counterparts in Wales and Northern Ireland, to talk specifically about how we can improve the recruitment of dentists in the United Kingdom, because this isn't just an issue in Scotland. Also, Colin Smyth will be pleased to recognise the important investment that the Scottish Government has put into the budget for next year around dentistry, and I suggest for him, if he continues to support the Scottish budget in this, so we can continue this improvement. Thank you.
Question number 5, Douglas Lumsden.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it plans to update planning guidance for battery energy storage systems.
Minister Alistair Allen.
Where new development proposals come forward, our fourth National Planning Framework, published and adopted in 2023, ensures the impacts of proposals on communities and nature are important considerations in the decision-making process. On the 5th of November, NESO published advice to the UK Government on how to achieve clean power by 2030. At the same time, NESO also published consultations on the connections queue reform, and the UK Government is due to publish a Clean Power Action Plan. The outputs of this work will be considered in due course.
Douglas Lumsden.
Presiding Officer, at present there are 18 battery sites operational. A further 18 are under construction. There are 132 sites with planning permission granted, awaiting construction, and a further 136 sites with planning permission submitted. It's completely out of control. One developer told us there is a gold rush to get these in the planning process before the SNP government puts controls in place. So can I ask the Minister if the government will consider a moratorium on new applications until we have an energy strategy and can evaluate how many of these battery sites are required and where?
Minister.
Well, I think it's important to say that there is a statutory structure which must be followed in all decision-making in the planning system. And Section 25 of the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act requires that decisions must be made in accordance with the development plan. I understand the point that the member is making, I think, about cumulative impacts. The cumulative impacts of development, including landscape and visual and amenity impacts, are important considerations in the determination of applications where such impacts are identified.
Question number 6, Claire Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to improve rail services for passengers in the Mid-Scotland and Fife region.
Cabinet Secretary.
I appreciate the services in Fife have been affected by overcrowding for some time. ScotRail is working hard to increase the capacity and improve the resilience of services, and has recruited more maintenance and engineering staff as well as train drivers. Newly recruited engineering staff will allow for 2 high-speed trains to be returned into service between Glasgow and Aberdeen from the December timetable change, which will release diesel trains for other parts of the network. Additional stops will also continue to be made at Dalmeny and Burntisland to reduce pressure on busy morning and evening leave-in services. The electrification work between Edinburgh and Dalmeny has started. This is the first step towards electrification of the Fife routes in Mid-Scotland and Fife, which sees a reliable service. ScotRail is adding longer trains to Saturday on Glasgow to Alloa lines to meet the growing passenger demand.
Claire Baker.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary has identified a number of issues with the trains in my region, but I want to ask about ScotRail's proposals to adjust the hours of 54 station ticket offices, which conceals the fact that there's actually 47 stations that will change their hours right across my region. I do feel there's a lack of transparency around these plans, and they're not being clearly communicated to the public. The 2022 consultation showed that passengers did not support changes to ticket offices, and the government's own report into the safety of women and girls emphasised the importance of having visible station staff. The ongoing consultation does not include members of the public, so how will the Cabinet Secretary ensure that the needs of all passengers are heard, and can she confirm that ScotRail will provide an up-to-date equality impact assessment?
Cabinet Secretary.
On that latter point, yes, that point has already been made to a number of members. In relation to the issue, she'll know that there's not been adjustments of ticket office opening hours for 30 years. There's been a reduction in sales from ticket offices from 78% to 14%. I'm glad she corrected herself that there aren't ticket offices closing, they are being adjusted. And in her region, Cowdenbeath will have opening times reduced, however staffing hours remain unchanged. Cooper will see opening hours actually increase. Dalmeny will have opening times reduced, however staffing hours remain unchanged on that line. Dunfermline City will have opening hours increased, and also in terms of Lookers, opening times will be reduced, however staffing hours remain unchanged. Visibility on platforms in stations is important, as she stresses, and that is the focus on adjustments that are being made and currently consulted on with staff.
Thank you. A concise question 7. Jackie Dunbar.
Ask the Scottish Government how it is supporting NHS Grampian with its winter preparedness.
Cabinet Secretary Neil Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Earlier this year, the Scottish Government and COSLA jointly published a plan setting out how we will address the exceptional pressures facing our health and care services over winter. Building on previous experience, we're supporting local systems, including NHS Grampian, with a comprehensive whole-system range of effective measures. This includes preventative actions such as vaccination programmes, ensuring people receive the right care in the right place at the right time, through measures such as hospital at home and public messaging campaigns, maximising capacity and capability in the system and focusing on the well-being of our workforce.
Jackie Dunbar.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Following the critical incident declared last week in the NHS Grampian, can the Cabinet Secretary speak to the actions which the Scottish Government will take to alleviate pressure on A&E services in the winter months and ensure the most effective care possible for patients?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I thank Jackie Dunbar for that question, and also want to put on record again my thanks to the staff in NHS Grampian and those other boards that were involved in responding to the critical incident. I recognise clearly the relationship that there is between long waits and overcrowding in A&E and increased risk of harm. That's why the budget for next year is investing in waiting times action and to address capacity in primary and social care. That, Presiding Officer, can clearly only happen if colleagues vote for it. But also we continue to work now with health boards and the Centre for Sustainable Delivery to enhance patient flow at acute sites, improve discharge planning and hospital home services, and reduce conveyance of people from care homes where clinically appropriate, all of which will turn into reduce A&E pressures. Finally, officials continue to meet regularly with NHS Grampian specifically to discuss improvement activity underway within the board and any challenges that they are facing.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions. At question number 1, I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I begin on a positive by welcoming something the SNP Finance Secretary did yesterday. Not the disastrous SNP budget, of course. I want to thank her for holding up my letter to John Swinney for all of Scotland to see. A letter setting out how my party is proudly on the side of Scotland's hard-working taxpayers and businesses. I brought my own copy today, but instead of reducing tax, of course, the SNP have dragged more Scots into paying higher income tax. Every worker earning over £30,000 will be forced to pay more than those in the rest of the UK. So how can the SNP boast about always taking more for public services that only ever get worse?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, let me reassure you that I will not be using props in the course of this answer, unlike Mr Finlay. But Mr Finlay helpfully reminds the public of the problem with his letter to me of the other week. Mr Finlay's letter discloses a £950 million gaping hole at the very heart of the Conservative taxation proposals to this Parliament. That reeks of economic incompetence. That economic incompetence is a consistent approach for the Scottish Conservatives.
So Finlay.
Because I know how much John Swinney appreciated my first letter, I've sent him a second one this morning. It sets out the savings we'd make. Our plans are reasonable, affordable, fully costed and fully funded. They would deliver fairness for Scotland's taxpayers. But the SNP proudly boast they will make Scottish workers pay £1.7 billion more next year than if they lived elsewhere in the UK. The Finance Secretary even had the audacity to shout about reducing bills for lower earners. The SNP's contract is worth, at most, £1 a month to people earning less than £30,000. £1. What are they supposed to do with that? Buy a selection box from Poundland?
First Minister.
I honestly think Mr Finlay is going to have to practice his gags a little bit more after that one. Let me helpfully I'll look for. I haven't seen Mr Finlay's letter yet. I was out at an early learning centre this morning explaining the importance of the Government's commitment to lift the two-child cap which the Conservatives imposed, sending children into poverty in our country. So I'll have a good look at the letter when I get back upstairs. But let me just tell Mr Finlay two things. First of all, on tax alone, 50%, more than 50% of taxpayers in Scotland are better off than in the rest of the United Kingdom as a consequence of the tax decisions that we have made. And when you take together tax and social security, 60% of taxpayers in Scotland are better off than if they lived in the rest of the United Kingdom. That is what I call delivering for Scotland.
Russell Finlay.
Well, I hope that John Swinney learned something from the children at the Early Learning Centre. We know that public services never improve under the SNP. More taxpayers' money is going to the NHS, but the SNP have no plans to reduce waiting lists or bureaucracy. Right. Scotland's Independent Auditor-General this week said the Government has no vision for our health service and that changes are urgently needed. Hospitals across Scotland are already in crisis. And while the SNP Health Secretary takes taxpayer-funded limos to Pittodrie, ambulances are being sent away from Aberdeen Royal. Yet the SNP government contains a rehashed pledge to reduce waiting times. That same promise was supposed to have been delivered by September, 3 months ago. So why would anyone believe the SNP will keep their word this time?
First Minister.
Mr Finlay made the point that apparently there is no enhancement of public services in Scotland, but the Early Learning and Childcare Centre that I visited this morning is part of a network around the country which is supported by £1 billion of early learning and childcare investment, which has meant that for 3- and 4-year-olds in this country, and for many 2-year-olds, they have access to 1,140 hours of early learning and childcare, a promise made by the Scottish Government and delivered by this SNP government. Now, Mr Finlay talks about efficiency within government, and the Minister for Public Finance, Ivan McKee, who is sitting in the chamber today, was referenced by the Finance Secretary yesterday as having a remit to address the issues of productivity and performance within public services, and he is devoting his energy to doing that as part of the plans that the Health Secretary and other ministers are taking forward in our public services. So, for Mr Finlay for Mr Finlay's benefit, I would say this. This government is absolutely determined to improve the performance of our public services. There are challenges in our public services arising out of the disruptive effect of COVID, but this government is 100% focused on making
Let's
sure...
hear the First Minister.
This government is 100% focused on ensuring that the resources that we've decided to allocate to our public services have the effect of meeting the needs of the people of Scotland, but it will only happen if this Parliament supports the Government's budget, and I invite Mr Finlay to do so.
Russell Finlay.
I, for one, am delighted to hear John Swinney is going to fix the mess that he's made over the past 17 years is going to begin fixing the mess that he made for 17 long, miserable years. This budget perfectly illustrates what a John Swinney government looks like. Broken promises rehashed, no plans to fix the NHS, benefits rising out of control, bigger bills for businesses, higher taxes on workers, and more waste on ferries and nonsense projects. People have had enough of taxes going up while public services decline. This budget might work inside the left-wing Holyrood bubble, but how does it help workers and businesses in the real world?
First Minister.
Well, I suspect businesses around the country will welcome the tripling of investment. Mr Burnett is laughing, and Mr Lumsden, as usual, is out of his seat with his shouting and bawling. Well, maybe Mr Lumsden should think.
Members, let's settle.
Maybe Mr Lumsden and Mr Burnett can find it in themselves to welcome the tripling of investment in offshore renewable investment that the government has put in place. Maybe they could welcome the £768 million investment in housing to boost affordable housing expenditure in Scotland. Perhaps they could welcome the £200 million refuelling of the Scottish National Investment Bank to strengthen the Scottish economy. That's this government delivering to strengthen the economy in Scotland.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yesterday, the Finance Secretary laid out the SNP government's budget for the upcoming year. Thanks to a UK Labour government getting rid of the Tories and ending the era of austerity, the Scottish Government have an additional £5.2 billion to spend. This was an opportunity to confront the challenges facing our country and take us in a new direction, an opportunity clearly missed. And nowhere is that more important or clearer than with our NHS. So when 1 in 6 Scots are on an NHS waiting list, why is the height of John Swinney's ambition that by March 2026 Scots won't have to wait more than a year just for an appointment?
First Minister.
The Government, as I've explained to Mr Finlay, is absolutely focused on improving waiting times, and the record financial settlement for the health service of £21 billion is a very significant contribution to enabling that to be the case. And ministers will work with health boards, as I saw when I visited Forth Valley Royal Hospital on Monday, on initiatives to practically improve waiting times in our hospitals. And Mr Sarwar has my commitment the Government will do that. Now, I'm really interested in Mr Sarwar's language about new direction, because if Mr Sarwar doesn't like the direction we're taking about health service expenditure, do I take it to mean that he doesn't support the increase to £21 billion? Does he want less than that? Is that new direction? Is that the new direction that Mr Sarwar wants, that he wants us to have less investment in the National Health Service? Now,
let's hear the First Minister.
What I'd simply say to Mr Sarwar is this. I welcome the investments that are being made in our public services and our public finances as a consequence of the United Kingdom Government's decisions. That is welcome. I've made that clear before. But what now matters is, will the Labour Party support the Government by making sure that those numbers can be put into practical reality? Will the Labour Party support the Government's budget to make sure we can invest £21 billion in the National Health Service?
Anna Sarwar.
I think John Swinney's forgotten. He's not a bank manager. He's meant to be running a country, delivering positive outcomes for the country. And all he does is what he normally does. This SNP government focuses on the inputs and not on the outcomes for patients across the country. And within the last week, we have had damning reports from the IFS and Audit Scotland. The IFS, despite proportionally higher spending and more staff, Scotland's NHS is lagging behind England. On almost every measure, performance is worse. There are poorer outcomes for Scots. Audit Scotland, despite higher funding and more staff, fewer patients are being seen. No clear plan for reform. No delivery plan. Greater leadership is needed. But yet again, these warnings have been ignored. So why is this SNP government squandering the opportunity of £5.2 billion of additional money and record levels of spending that could actually take our NHS in that new direction?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, if we look at some of the issues on performance, for example, there has been an increase in the number of operations performed in the National Health Service over the last 12 months. We have seen increases in the performance on waiting times in a number of different disciplines. If we look at cancer care, there has been improvements in the performance in relation to the 31-day standards so that more patients have been treated and been treated in a quicker timescale. Now, Mr Sarwar asks about the squandering of the opportunity. Well, the only squandering of the opportunity that will go on is if the government is unable to put the practical proposals in the budget into practice on the 1st of April. That means this Parliament has got to pass the government's budget. Now, we are open, very open, to constructive discussion with political parties about the contents of the budget. But Mr Sarwar will, in his own words, squander the possibility of strengthening our public services if he doesn't vote for the government's budget.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, can I remind John Swinney that SNP MPs voted against £5.2 billion of additional money coming to the Scottish Government just there. And John Swinney did what he always does, read out a long list of inputs and not actually address the issues that would improve outcomes for patients. The usual sticky plaster approach.
Let us hear Mr Sarwar.
I can understand why his blood pressure is high, don't worry, Presiding Officer. The usual sticky plaster approach, all about inputs and not about outcomes. Because it's not just about how much you spend, it's about the quality of care that patients receive and the health of our nation. It's not just about how much you spend, it's about supporting businesses to thrive and grow. It's not just about how much you spend, it's about our children leaving school with the skills they need. And all measures, John Swinney and the SNP have failed, just hoping they can spend more money in the same way and get a different result. But isn't it clear that this is a government with no plan, no leadership and no vision for Scotland?
First Minister.
I think there's really a big problem if the opposition leader in this Parliament cannot change his script to adjust to the answers that I give. Mr Sarwar, on a very basic exchange, Mr Sarwar says that I only talked about inputs when I talked about the outcomes and the performance of the National Health Service. So really, it's not good enough for Mr Sarwar, if he can't even step up to be a decent leader of an opposition party, to aspire to do anything else.
Let's hear one another.
If Mr Sarwar is concerned about business, he should be concerned about the impact of employers' national insurance contributions. Because he only needs to look at his UK government data on this. The impact of employers' national insurance contributions are not going to improve the standard of living in people in the United Kingdom over a 5-year period. So that's a rather gloomy outlook that Mr Sarwar has attached himself to. What I would simply say to Mr Sarwar is that I'm interested in making progress for Scotland. It's what I've been about all my political life. And we've delivered big progress. I told Mr Finlay about the progress on early learning and childcare. We've seen economic performance in Scotland improve faster than in the rest of the United Kingdom. I want to build on that, but it will only happen if Mr Sarwar and his colleagues support a government budget that will repair the damage to the winter fuel cuts from the Labour government, raise the two-child limit, all involved in the government's budget. Mr Sarwar should decide to support the government's budget and deliver a good outcome for the people of Scotland.
Question number 3, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister when the Cabinet will next meet.
First Minister.
The Cabinet will next meet on Tuesday.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Presiding Officer, rural healthcare is a key priority for the Scottish Liberal Democrats, and the Government listened to some of our demands by including in the draft budget yesterday a long overdue replacement for the Belford Hospital in Fort William. Now we need shovels in the ground. But they stopped short of replacing the Gilbert Bain Hospital in Lerwick or ensuring 24/7 access at Portree Hospital for emergency care. Today, I want to remind the First Minister about what is going on in the far north. Mothers are forced to travel 100 miles through the snow and the ice to give birth in Inverness. And an investigation by the Scottish Human Rights Commission received testimony to say that the situation was, and I quote, barbaric, women left terrified by 4-hour drives in the dark with deer on the road. It even heard that some have lost their fertility due to delays in accessing Raigmore in emergencies. No wonder they're moving away or choosing not to have any more children. Presiding Officer, Liberal Democrats have repeatedly asked for midwife-led maternity care in the far north. What is the First Minister going to do about it? Because these mums are still in danger.
First Minister.
So there are obviously a number of issues that Mr Cole-Hamilton has raised with us, both in the discussions and also in the points that he puts to me today. And in the discussions we've set forward and we've set out in the budget, a number of steps which address some of the issues about access to general practice services, and we'll look further at the issues in relation to Portree that he mentioned. I'm glad that we made progress on the Belford, and my colleague Deputy First Minister is delighted with that announcement as well. In relation to the Caithness situation is a slightly different question, because it is informed by assessments of patient safety about the volume of maternity cases that can be dealt with in Caithness. So it's not, I think, a question of investment. It is a question about the clinical safety of the service that is involved. Now, I quite understand, I totally understand, the challenges and the difficulties of the journey that Mr Cole-Hamilton narrates to me, because it is a long and difficult journey. But where ministers receive advice on clinical safety, we really have to have very strong reasons not to follow that clinical advice. But I will happily engage with Mr Cole-Hamilton and his colleagues, as will the Health Secretary, on this important question, to try to address the concerns which I know will exist in Caithness about this issue, and to try to find a way of reassuring the individuals on whose behalf Mr Cole-Hamilton raises the question today.
Question number 4, Marie McNair.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what assessment the Scottish Government has made of the reported claims of not-for-profit social care providers regarding the impact of increased employer national insurance contributions on the sector in Scotland.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, not-for-profit social care providers play a vital role in delivering care across Scotland, and I am very grateful for the hard work and dedication of everyone working in the sector. The Scottish Government firmly shares the concerns about the profound impact the increase in national insurance will have in Scotland, estimated to cost the adult care sector at least £85 million per year. We have outlined this to the United Kingdom Government and asked them to reimburse the national insurance increase for charities and social care providers in Scotland. We will continue to press the UK Government to do the right thing and reimburse, and I would ask all other parties in Parliament to do the same.
Marie McNair.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. The increase to contributions has been described as catastrophic for Scotland's social care sector. Will the First Minister join me in calling on Anna Sarwar's Labour colleagues in Westminster to fully reimburse costs to the Scottish Government for Labour's short-sighted plans to increase employer national insurance contributions in order for us to protect our social care services across the country?
First Minister.
I certainly make that call, and we've made this point to the United Kingdom Government, because Scotland's care providers are going to be facing a significant increase in the cost of their operations as a consequence of this activity, and we depend on these individual organisations to contribute to the delivery of social care within Scotland. The danger of the employer's national insurance contributions increase is that it's essentially ushering austerity by the back door, because although there is a welcome increase in investment in public expenditure, there is also a commensurate increase in cost in the delivery of public services, and I would ask the United Kingdom Government to recognise that, so that we can take forward the effective investment in the care services upon which our public depend.
Brief supplementary, Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Labour has let down the Scottish social care sector with its tax on jobs, but doesn't the blame for the worsening crisis in care rest just as much with John Swinney as it does with Keir Starmer? Since 2021, the care sector has been in limbo, waiting for the National Care Service, which has swallowed up £30 million, which could have been spent to mitigate Labour's national insurance hikes. So will the First Minister now do this? Take this opportunity to confirm that the National Care Service is dead and buried, and allow ministers, councils and care providers to focus all their attention and their money on the worsening crisis in Scotland's social care.
First Minister.
But I can assure Mr Hoy that there's no lack of focus on addressing the challenges on delayed discharge and social care in my government, and the Health Secretary and I spend a great deal of time on this question. It's been a substantial issue for discussion with our local authority colleagues as we've taken forward the budget dialogue that I promised would be undertaken. There are conclusions to be arrived at about the National Care Service, but fundamentally what the National Care Service is designed to do, and this is an important point which Mr Hoy cannot ignore, is that there is huge variation in the availability of social care services from one part of the country to the other. Some parts of the country, the availability is absolutely first class. In other parts of the country, it's poor. That's not good enough for the citizens of Scotland, and I intend to fix that.
Question number 5, Sharon Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is regarding any potential risk to the environment of excessive removal of peat during excavation projects.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Scotland's peatlands are critical to mitigating and adapting to the climate and nature emergencies. They store carbon, support biodiversity, control flooding and improve river quality. Excavation of peat during development can increase emissions and damage nature. Our fourth National Planning Framework includes policies to protect carbon-rich soils, restore peatlands and minimise disturbance to soils from development.
Sharon Dowie.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. We pay grants for peatland restoration, but at the same time allow peatland to be ripped up. Constituents at Bar Hill in South Ayrshire are concerned about the significant removal of peat to make way for the construction of a battery storage facility. They are concerned about lorries making hundreds of journeys along dangerous and unsuitable roads to facilitate this. Currently, it is 50 lorry loads a day, but has been suggested to Bar Hill and Pinbury villagers that this would rise to 200 per day from January. South Scotland residents are worried about the over-industrialisation of their part of the countryside. What guarantees can the First Minister give to people in South Ayrshire that their lives will not be adversely impacted by another controversial energy project?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the development that Sharon Dowie raises with me is a live planning application, so I cannot make any specific comment about that planning application. What I can say, however, is that I'm simply pointing out that I would be breaching the ministerial code. I would be breaching the ministerial code if I commented on a live planning application.
Let us hear the First Minister.
Where development on peatland and carbon-rich soils or priority peatland habitat is proposed, a detailed site-specific assessment will be required to identify effects on peatland quality, habitats and emissions so that mitigation can be built into project design and subsequent management. That is the obligation that is contained within National Planning Framework 4, and I would expect that to be applied by all planning authorities.
Emma Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government has invested heavily in nature-based solutions to climate change, including doubling the rate of peatland restoration over the last 2 years to reach record levels. Can the First Minister outline how yesterday's Scottish budget will continue to support our efforts to reduce emissions and tackle the climate crisis?
With reference to the substantive question, First Minister.
Certainly, on the question of peatland restoration, which is implicit in the question that's been raised, the Government allocated additional resources to strengthen the work that is undertaken to improve the quality of Scotland's peatland resource. This is a huge asset for Scotland in dealing with climate and nature emergencies, and I'm glad that we were able to secure the necessary investment to support this development within the Scottish Government's budget yesterday.
Thank you. Question number 6, Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what progress is being made by the Scottish Government in establishing Scotland as a world leader in the green hydrogen sector.
First Minister.
So Scotland has the potential to be a world-leading hydrogen nation, and the Scottish Government is committed to helping the Scottish hydrogen sector develop and grow. The publication last week of Scotland's first hydrogen export plan marks a milestone in the country's journey toward becoming a hydrogen exporting nation. The plan sets out the key steps required to establish large-scale hydrogen production domestically, strengthening existing international partnerships and building new ones to enable exports and investment.
Audrey Nicholl.
Minister for that response. The Scottish Government has indeed an international vision for the hydrogen economy in Scotland. Indeed, research from PwC confirms Scotland is leading the UK in the creation of green jobs. Given the establishment of Scotland's hydrogen sector has the potential to become a key driver of green growth and prosperity, can the First Minister say more about how the Scottish Government's budget will further invest in a managed just transition and the benefits this will bring to Scotland?
Minister. President, one of the fundamental points in the budget yesterday was the commitment to invest in Scotland's journey to net zero and to achieve the objectives that Audrey Nicholl has talked about. The utilisation of ScotWind resources for long-term investment is a significant strength in the budget. We've avoided the use of ScotWind resources to support day-to-day expenditure, which I know members of Parliament wanted us to avoid, and we have successfully avoided doing that. We are committed to taking forward the proposals in our Green Industrial Strategy, which will help us to take forward the investment in the hydrogen sector, and that will of course only be supported if the Government's budget passes and we're able to deploy that expenditure in the next financial year.
Thank you. We move to open and constituency supplementaries, and I call Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of my long-standing campaign to lower petrol pump prices in my constituency. He will also know that in 2022 the Competition and Markets Authority launched an investigation into road fuel prices and concluded that action was needed to improve competition and ultimately stop fuel retailers from ripping off drivers. An update from the CMA last week indicates that whilst prices have dropped since July, drivers are still paying over the odds for fuel. This has a knock-on effect on other living costs, such as food. Now, will the First Minister therefore join me today in urging the new UK Labour Government to speed up progress on the CMA's recommendations so weak competition can be addressed and fuel retailers held to account?
First Minister.
I'm very much aware of the tenacious campaign that Stuart McMillan has led on this particular issue on behalf of his constituents, and high fuel costs can make a significant contribution to the pressure that households and businesses wrestle with on an ongoing basis. While I welcome the UK Government's plans to implement the CMA recommendations on the fuel price market, I would urge them to speed up progress where possible. Given the CMA's comments on current fuel prices, we would urge the United Kingdom Government to use the CMA's new fuel monitoring function, which commences in January of next year, to scrutinise the market and take action where necessary to keep prices that are paid by drivers at the lowest possible rate possible.
Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week marked 2 decades since Alistair Wilson was fatally shot on the doorstep of his family home in Nairn, while his wife Veronica and 2 young sons were upstairs. 2 decades on, his killer continues to evade justice. And throughout this whole time, Veronica and her family have shown great strength and dignity, but it has been very clear that they are now critical of Police Scotland, elements of the investigation, and the Chief Constable of Police Scotland, who repeatedly refuses to meet with them, something I've urged Chief Constable Farrell to reconsider. But can I ask the First Minister, while acknowledging he cannot comment on a live police investigation, if he will meet with Veronica and her family to listen to what they have endured for the last 20 years and what they continue to go through as they fight to see the killer of their husband and father finally brought to justice?
First Minister.
President, I have, as I've said to Mr Ross before when he's raised this issue in Parliament, I have every sympathy with Mrs Wilson and her family at the unbearable loss that they have suffered and the trauma that they have experienced by the fact that the perpetrators of that attack have not been brought to justice, and I have every sympathy with them in that respect. Mr Ross realises, the framing of his question recognises this point, that this is a live police investigation and these are operational matters for the Chief Constable to take forward. But with the caveats that Mr Ross has put into his question, that I cannot engage on a live police investigation, I would be prepared to meet with Mrs Wilson and her family to hear of their anguish. There will be a limit to what I can do, but if it provides any assistance and support to the family that the First Minister is prepared to listen to their concerns, then I'm prepared to do that.
I call Martin Whitfield.
grateful, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of EDF's decision to extend the life of Torness Nuclear Power Station until 2030, a move that will secure hundreds of jobs, boost East Lothian and the south of Scotland's economy, but also provide crucial support to Scotland's energy grid. Torness has been Scotland's most productive clean energy asset, cutting 100 million tonnes of CO2, reducing the risk of blackouts and saving consumers up to £75 annually on their energy bills. So will the First Minister warmly welcome this extension?
First Minister.
So the Government has made clear that we welcome stability in energy supplies, and the developments that have been taken forward by EDF support that objective. There is, of course, a transition that we have all got to make to lower cost energy products and prices. I think that is best secured through investment in renewable energy. I hope that GB Energy helps us to speed up the approach that's been taken, particularly developments on the grid, which are the responsibility of the United Kingdom Government, and I do hope the incoming United Kingdom Government is able to improve the performance in grid connection so that Scotland can realise its energy potential. Because if it doesn't, then we will not be able to realise the opportunities for lower energy prices, which everyone wants to see in Scotland.
Holly Coffey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the announcement of £768 million for affordable housing by the SNP government, which will deliver 8,000 new homes for social rent, mid-market rent and low-cost home ownership, some of which will, of course, be in my constituency. But I understand that this money will only be available if the Parliament votes for the budget. Does the First Minister agree that if MSPs want to tackle the housing emergency, they need to back the budget that releases the money to do this?
First Minister.
Mr Coffey is 100% correct. It must... I'll say it again since it went down so well. Mr Coffey is 100% correct. Let me just share the observation to Parliament that if we want to spend the resources that the Government allocated yesterday on delivering outcomes such as 8,000 more affordable homes, I think that constitutes an outcome in Mr Sarwar's definition. Parliament's got to be prepared to vote for the Government's budget. The time for posturing will be over soon. Parliament...
Continue, First Minister.
The time for posturing will be over soon. The time to vote for the Government's budget is coming, and if people want investment in housing, they've got to vote for the Government's budget.
Sandesh Gulhani.
Thank you. A declaration of interest as a practising NHS GP. According to the latest data from the ONS, female life expectancy in Glasgow remains the lowest in Britain, with 7 of the 10 lowest areas of the UK in Scotland. Males don't fare much better. This all points to the SNP failing women, failing to protect safe spaces, failing to provide adequate housing for single mothers and failing to tackle women's health inequalities. So can I ask the First Minister if he is concerned by these consistently woeful statistics and what he is going to do about it?
First Minister.
I certainly am concerned about these issues, and that's why the Government has taken forward a specific women's health plan to address many of the issues that Dr Gulhani puts to me. But there is also another important factor, and that's the persistence of poverty in our society. And Dr Gulhani, I appreciate his commitment to the National Health Service, but his party presided over 14 years of punishing austerity, which has increased poverty levels in our country. To be fair, when the Labour government left office in 2010, poverty rates were falling. And they've gone up over 14 years. Why? Because of austerity from the Conservatives. So Dr Gulhani has got no strength to put these points to me. The Tories have inflicted misery and poverty on people in Scotland, and this government is trying to repair the damage.
Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yesterday we heard that Sutherland Spaceport has been mothballed by Orbix. The spaceport was a positive development for the Sutherland community, bringing 40 jobs and economic benefits to a part of the Highlands that has suffered from depopulation. Orbex have received £14.6 million of public investment for the spaceport. Can I ask the First Minister if he'll intervene to make sure the development continues? And if that's not possible, will he make sure that the public investment can be recouped and used to bring jobs and an economic boost to that part of the Highlands?
First Minister.
I understand entirely the concern that Rhoda Grant puts to me, and my understanding of the decision that's been arrived at is to concentrate on the spaceport development that is proposed in Shetland. Now, Rhoda Grant raises two issues with me. One, will I intervene to see if there is an alternative, and I give her that assurance that ministers will do so, to see if there is any other way that this can be taken forward. She then raises what I think is a completely reasonable question about public investment that has been committed, either spent or committed to the development, and how that stands. There will be contractual arrangements that have been put in place in the provision of grant funding, and I will explore those issues and reply in writing to Rhoda Grant about what steps can be taken to address what I recognise to be a legitimate issue that she's raised with me today.
Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland's cultural sector is the beating heart of our country, with considerable cross-policy impact, including in health and well-being. I warmly welcome that the Government has committed a record increase of £34 million to the culture budget, which will facilitate the provision of multi-year funding despite a single-year fixed budget from Westminster. Does the First Minister agree that, given Labour's ambition was for £25 million, £9 million less than is going to be delivered, that it is incumbent on all Labour MPs to back the budget and support our creative industries?
First Minister.
President Officer, I think Claire Adamson makes a very reasonable point to Parliament today. One of the commitments in but there's many commitments in the budget of which I'm very proud. I'm particularly proud that the Government is fulfilling its commitments to the artistic and creative community. It is a community, as I've said in my responses to First Minister's questions before, that is precious to me. I think it's vital that Scotland as a country has a vibrant arts and culture sector, and I'm delighted that the Government has been able to make such a formidable financial contribution to the future of the sector. But of course, Claire Adamson is also absolutely correct. That money will only be able to be spent if the Government budget passes. And to remind Parliament, the Government does not have enough support on its own to pass the budget. So we need to have a climate, and the Government is doing its best to try to reach agreement with other parties. I do encourage other parties, and especially the Labour Party, who are making a call for there to be increased expenditure on arts and culture, to recognise this as being one of the commitments that can be supported by the delivery of the Government's budget.
Thank you. The Scottish Greens certainly welcome progressive measures in the budget, including acceptance of green proposals for free ferry travel for young islanders and free bus travel for asylum seekers. But the peak rail fares that were removed by the Greens last year have returned. There's no cap on the price of bus fares as we proposed. Funding to make walking and cycling safer has been cut, and it doesn't appear that there's any funding for the integrated ticketing announcement the Government made in April. There is, though, plenty for climate-wrecking motorway expansion. So does the First Minister recognise that far more is needed to make public transport cheaper, cycling safer and reduce transport emissions to protect our planet?
First Minister.
President, I recognise that there is a lot to be done in the tackling of the climate emergency to ensure that we can all play our part, which is why I am pleased that the Government has increased the amount of climate-positive expenditure within the budget from £4.7 billion that was planned to £4.9 billion. In addition to that, there has been resources introduced into the budget on the Nature Restoration Fund. We've also delivered on our commitment to implement asylum seeker free bus travel. We have put in place £188 million for active and sustainable travel, and there is of course other measures that were put to us by the Scottish Green Party about a real terms uplift to local government spending, upon which we have delivered, and also the investment in housing programmes at a total of £768 million. So I, of course, would love to do more. Mr Greer and I agree very much on the aspirations of ensuring that Scotland succeeds in our journey to net zero. But I can only allocate the resources that the Government has at its disposal, and we've done that formidably to support the action on the climate. But I look forward to further dialogue to try to address the issues that Mr Greer has raised with me today.
Alexander Stuart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, a surge in children experiencing domestic abuse across my region is deeply concerning. Charities and third sector organisations are having to contend with record levels of children seeking support. Therefore, what measures can the Scottish Government put in place to ensure these children receive the support they need, especially heading into the festive season?
First Minister.
I acknowledge the importance of the issue that Mr Stuart raises with me. Domestic abuse is abhorrent, and I had the privilege, Mr Stuart represents the region which my constituency is a part, and I had the privilege of launching the 16 days of activism on gender-based violence to women and girls in Perth Concert Hall a week past Friday, and it was an important event. Mr Stuart will be familiar with it from his membership of Perth and Kinross Council. We have all got to take action, and the Government has legislated to outlaw domestic abuse, and as a consequence of that, more cases are now being pursued through the courts. And as I said in my response to Pam Gossel the other week there, although there's an increase in the recording of domestic abuse, that is in a sense a recognition that more people are coming forward, more women and girls are coming forward to recognise that horror and to report it, and those responsible should be brought to justice. We've all got to exercise leadership, particularly men, on this question, and for that reason I have decided that I will participate in the debate this afternoon on violence against women and girls, and I will close for the Government to make it clear from a leadership position how intolerable I consider domestic abuse to be.
Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the SNP Government's decision to scrap the hated two-child cap, a policy started by the Tories and continued by Labour. I understand that Mr Keir Starmer this morning said that the scrapping of the two-child cap is not a silver bullet, but I believe that it is a major step in tackling child poverty. Does the First Minister share my view that it is time for Keir Starmer to follow the Scottish Government in this principled lead that we have taken and scrap the cap? And can I ask the First Minister what he will do to persuade the Prime Minister to see sense on this issue?
First Minister.
The Scottish Government has announced its proposals to end the heinous two-child limit, and it is causing misery for children and families in Scotland. We will take that action because the UK Labour Government has to date failed to do so. I am grateful for the support of a range of different organisations who have welcomed the steps that were announced by the Finance Secretary yesterday, and I will certainly use every opportunity I have to persuade the Prime Minister to take the similar action that we are taking and to relieve the burden of poverty of this particular pernicious part of the welfare system from inflicting poverty on children and families in the United Kingdom.
And Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Locum Psychiatrist Survey published by the Royal College of Psychiatrists found that the number of whole-time equivalent general psychiatrists has not changed in a decade. This stagnation has contributed to a loss of permanent staff, jeopardised patient treatment and safety, and led to millions of pounds excessively spent on locum psychiatrist rates. Does the First Minister accept that this problem needs sustained investment, not short-term fixes, not in-year budget raids, and certainly not a £20 million cut to the mental health services budget?
First Minister.
Well, there is no such thing in relation to the mental health budget. The Government is investing substantively in mental health services to improve performance, and we're already seeing within the CAMS system, for example, significant improvements in waiting times. I agree with Mr Sweeney about the importance of sustained investment. That's what the Government is committed to, and that's what the Government will deliver.
That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a Members' Business debate in the name of Paul Sweeney, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and the gallery to do so.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McMillan.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stuart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.